Hi, I'm Jack Koenig with Graco Industrial Lubrication Equipment. Today I'm out in our factory in Anoka, Minnesota. You might hear some of the forklifts buzzing around behind me. My guest is a 2007 Class 8 truck that we borrowed from our neighbors at Hennepin Technical College. I'm going to walk you around the grease points and make it easier for you to identify them in the field and hopefully help you spec out some jobs. Here we get a nice look at the power steering system. The steering column comes down to the U-joint, and you can see there are some grease fittings along that, but we're not going to be greasing them because they rotate. The pitman arm will have one grease fitting at the bottom where it meets the drag link, and then the other end of the drag link on the rear there will also have a fitting. We don't see them from this angle, but they're going to grease those. The top of the pitman arm sometimes has a grease point, sometimes it doesn't. Regardless, we don't lubricate that point because it needs such a small amount of grease that they can just hit that manually once a year or however often they want to do that. But if we put an auto lube connection on there, it's going to be too much grease. Here's a view from above the pitman arm, and as we push in, there is the front drag link point. When you're actually looking for these, unless you're rolling around on the floor, you're mostly going to have to reach your hand back there to feel where the fitting is. That's more an issue during install. When you're just speccing out a system, it's safe to assume that the front left of every truck has 2 points on the drag link. A really heavy truck like a snowplow might also have a steering assist, which is a second drag link on the right side, but on the driver or left side there's always a drag link. On the passenger or right side it's optional. This portion of the steering actually has about half a dozen grease points, but from this angle we can only see 2 of them. The upper kingpin point is visible right next to the tire there, and we can also see the point for the slack adjuster. From this view, the slack adjuster point is seen at the upper left corner of the assembly, and we can also see the upper kingpin point next to the tire. At the top of our view is one end of the drag link. The grease point is going to be on the opposite side of our current view. This angle is from right behind the front left bumper. We get a nice shot of several of the fittings here. Near the top you can see by that red mark, that's your S-cam tube. Most trucks have enclosed S-cams, so there's only going to be 1 point and it's on the tube. When you look at a trailer, a lot of trailers have open S-cams, so they don't have the tube. They just have 2 fittings right on the bearings. But because this is a truck, we have the S-cam tube at the top and there's 1 point for it. Down at the bottom we can see the lower kingpin, and then even further down the tie rod end. As we come over here to the side a little bit, that's our drag link. So this is the rear drag link point. On the other side of the drag link you can see the spring, and at the end of the spring there's a grease fitting. So that's one of the spring pins. That'll be one of 3 points. The other 2 on this vehicle are going to be in the rear where another pin and the spring shackle can be found. This is behind the tire. We're seeing the spring shackle and the rear spring pin. If the front pin takes grease, these 2 will as well. They come in a set of 3. So if you have 1 spring point, you're going to have 3 on each side, 6 for the whole front of the vehicle. This is a view from between the frame rails, between the rear wheels, right next to the axle. This angle lets us see both the S-cam tube at the top and the slack adjuster point at the bottom. So these are drum brakes, and there are 2 points, and there's going to be 2 points for each wheel on your drum brakes. Our example truck does not include a 5th wheel, and not all trucks will. But just to give you an example, here we're going to go into the office and take a look at a photo of a 5th wheel. This one already has a grease jockey system installed underneath, so you can see there are 4 points where grease is mounding up inside of that trough. That's where an injector is already tubed up to those 4 points on the back side. In the real world, when you're out speccing out a truck, you might find pre-drilled fifth wheels that already have the holes there, but most of them probably are not going to have those holes. So you're just going to assume 4 points for the plate. Along the side of the plate, there are 2 pivots, one on each side. They're actually pins inside of bushings on which that fifth wheel can tip forward and backward. So they're called the pivot pins or the pivot points. We typically assume that there's going to be 2 of them, but you'd also want to look around the side there and make sure that there's a Zerk on each of those pins. Our standard fifth wheel kit has 4 points for the plate and 2 points for the pin, or pins rather. But if you don't have those pins, you can just remove those injectors and plug the holes. The other thing you can see off on the left there is a handle for the jaw release. The jaw is right in the middle of the fifth wheel. That sometimes gets greased as well, but what you'll typically see is a grease point around the outside edge of the plate on the side there. It'll have a remote line that goes into the jaw so that it can be greased from the side instead of trying to reach inside that jaw, which would be kind of dangerous. So those are some of the typical points that you'll see on a fifth wheel. The other thing we didn't find on our example truck are grease points on the clutch or transmission. Here's a picture of one hanging down from an install I did a couple of years ago. This is really a remote line that hangs at the bottom of the transmission. Sometimes though you'll find 1 or 2 points up along the side, and a lot of trucks don't have any transmission points, but a lot of them also have 1, 2, or 3 points. So that's something that you need to look for as well. But it might also just be easier to ask the owner if they can tell you how many points are on the transmission. Now, as a quick summary, let's just cover the points that we found on this vehicle. We have upper kingpins and lower kingpins. We have drag link points. We have a slack adjuster and an S-cam on each of the drum brakes. We have tie rod ends. We have spring pins and spring shackles. And then some points that we did not see on this truck but that you want to look for when you survey are the fifth wheel pivot and plate and the clutch points or transmission points. If you have any questions about grease jockey systems or greasing a truck, please don't be afraid to contact us. We're always happy to help.